but then trying to implement surround sound with a real like Behringer X32 mixer with XLR cables connected to stage boxes and instruments and vocalists and on a real live stage setting, to implement that surround sound on a professional level. That's where I kind of got started, and I learned quite a bit of things through that, and actually discovered spatial audio through that surround sound setup of a live stage professional setup. So with that, I've actually come across one major issue which made me think of reverting back to stereo audio for live stage setup. And one of the major reasons to revert back to stereo produced audio for live stage compared to recording. Now, recording can be spatial, but projected, I've discovered through two and a half, maybe 3 years of experience of working on live stage, that spatial audio doesn't really work in a live stage setup. And it doesn't work for one major reason, and I'm going to address that reason as I go into this, and it's at my last point because I've added it at the last of my points here. And it will work good in a home theater system using Dolby Atmos, because Dolby Atmos is surround sound for projected audio. Spatial audio for projected audio. And whether it's through software like Ableton with DRVR, or through Sennheiser's plugin, spatial 3D audio is great for home theater and great for recorded audio or audio being produced through headphones. But when it comes to a live stage where there's going to be an audience full of people coming in, this is where I don't recommend it. And I'll give that reason at the very last of my points here, and why we should revert back to 2D audio for that purpose of having a large physical audience of people. Okay, so getting into the initial discussion here, talking about PA speakers now, talking about projected audio. PA is power amplified speakers. Now, ideally, it says here, I wrote, PA speakers should be facing away from an input source. And an input is like a microphone. This microphone here that I'm speaking into is an input source. Anything that inputs sound, that captures sound. I'm not talking about sound that's being produced like an instrument, like a digital instrument, because digital instruments are not capturing sound, they're producing sound digitally. So those are kind of exempt from this discussion here, but I'm talking about anything that captures, absorbs sound, not produces, okay? So PA speakers that are in the room that are to project that sound, they should be facing they should be facing away, the PA speakers should be facing away opposite of that input source. An input source should not be looping into an output source. Otherwise you create an eternal loop of audio which will spiral and increase to a point of high-pitched feedback. And that's just a kind of a general thing sound engineers know, that if you hold a microphone way too close to a speaker, you're going to get a really sharp, loud-pitched sound that can blow your eardrum. So you don't want to create that eternal loop of audio being sent, received, sent, received, sent, received, till the point it increases to a point of feedback. So that's why rule of thumb is PA speakers need to be facing away from the input. Now here's another catch, okay? We talked about polar patterns of microphones. So this is where it comes into play. That's why I said, based on how big your room is and how many PA speakers you want in the room, or how loud you want your sound in your room to be within the legal decibel, right, of listening, based on all of these factors, based on the polar pattern and the type of capsule of the microphone, whether it's cardioid, whether it's condenser, whether it's dynamic, will play a big factor. Will play a big factor based on also the PA speakers and where they need to be positioned. So that the fact is, if you have a cardioid mic, for example, a cardioid mic, as we've shown you previously, I don't know if I still have it up on my browser here. Oh, I do. Great. So let me share you my screen so you can see us here. Share screen. Okay. So a cardioid mic, let me get rid of this now. As you see here, has that mushroom shape, remember? So it doesn't pick up sound directly from the rear. So essentially, I could have a PA speaker facing towards me, like here's my hand you see on the camera. I could have the PA speaker facing towards me and hold my microphone, and because the back of the microphone, as you see in the cardioid where my mouse is on my screen, does not capture sound directly from the back. Because the speaker is facing directly towards me, I'm not going to get feedback. So this is why cardioid handheld dynamic microphones is mostly seen in live stage settings. And this is why you see a lot of people holding a handheld microphone in a live stage concert compared to using a lapel or compared to using one of those ribbon microphones that are seen in studio room for recordings, because it's designed to work in this application. And the reason you need a PA speaker in front of you is to be able to monitor you. It's called a stage monitor. So basically it's like this. The PA speaker is pushing this way, the capture is pushing this way, but they're opposite of each other. But the moment you turn to face each other, you create that eternal loop of feedback. So this is why an omnidirectional mic or any kind of subcardioid or supercardioid can increase the risk of feedback. The more you go to capture sound in the opposite direction, when you go from subcardioid to supercardioid, hypercardioid, bidirectional, and then finally omnidirectional, the closer you get to omnidirectional, the more feedback problems you're going to have on a live stage setting where you're getting projected audio coming through PA speakers. Because you do not, because like I said, one rule of law here is sound. The input cannot be facing the output. So this is how you need to know which mics you're going to use in certain applications of how you're structuring the sound projection. Now, this is why it's always challenging for lapel mics to be in a live stage setting where the PA speakers are so close to the one who is carrying the lapel mic. It's going to create lots of feedback. And there's hot spots where you walk and you have to stay away, and the moment you get too close to the speaker, you get feedback. These are the reasons why. So understanding this really helps to know how to structure sound for a room and what equipments are going to be needed based on what input equipment you're going to buy. Now, if some people say, you know what, I want to be able to capture the environment of the room, and I also want to project that sound. Well, essentially, that is possible, but it has to be structured within a next rule, which I'm going to mention. And that is usually generally more ideal in a larger environment. When you're in a small environment, you're very limited because of these feedback zones. And that's why you have to really choose your equipment wisely when you're in a small environment. But if you're in a large environment and things are spaced properly, you can have an omnidirectional microphone in a live stage projected setting, and it will project the sound of the environment of the room. And sometimes, like for example, if you have a large crusade and there's a minister that's going on a large crusade, and sometimes he has the backup vocals singing with their omnidirectional roof mics, and they're capturing, for example, the sound of the backup choir. And then suddenly he says, backup choir, be quiet, hush, wait, shh, listen. And then now you hear the entire congregation. And if you want to be able to capture that congregational worship, then that's where an omnidirectional condenser microphone is used. But to be able to do that, everything has to be spaced in a large environment. This is why you would see that they're able to capture the entire auditorium of congregation worshiping in the recording of audio, because they have the spacing to be able to allocate them to be able to use that omnidirectional condenser microphone to capture that sound. But if you're in a small environment and it's really compact and you got hot spots of feedback zones, you're limited because the speakers are so close to you. to be using cardioid microphones, handheld microphones only, which as soon as you step away from the microphone, because it's so restricted on how much source of the audio it's capturing, so that it eliminates that feedback, you're not able to capture the environment of sound. So the moment I step away, you'll hear my audio reducing. Like if I'm stepping away from here, see the audio is reducing quite a bit. And the reasons it's reducing is because the way the cardioid is shaped, and it captures sound within a certain range, a certain area or a certain distance. But omnidirectional is, and the 3D binaural omnidirectional is, no matter how far or how close away from the mic, it'll still capture that sound with precision and high quality. So as I say, PA speakers should be facing away from the input source so that it does not create a feedback zone, which creates limitations and hotspots of problem areas for directional microphones, or in other words, dynamic mics. The next here, when using an omnidirectional mic, so now we have that understanding based on what I shared with you, the difference between omnidirectional or condensers. Omnidirectional, which are generally condenser polar patterns. Omnidirectional polar patterns, which are generally condenser capsule microphones. There we go, sorry. If you're using those kind of microphones, roof-mounted, omnidirectional condenser mics or lapel mics that are omnidirectional condensers, it then does not matter where or whether the PA speaker is facing towards or away from the microphone capture source. Because that rule of it having to face away is for cardioid dynamic mics. But when it comes to omnidirectional or condenser mics, then it does not matter whether the PA speaker is facing towards the capture or away from the capture. Why? Because it's omnidirectional. So it's going to create feedback regardless, whether it's facing towards or away. See, that's kind of common sense, right? So because of that, it'll cause feedback regardless. So they say that a rule of thumb generally, that the further away the PA speaker is from that capture source, the higher you're allowed to increase that decibel for that PA speaker. So you have to keep that factor in mind. If you're going to be in a large environment and you need that PA speaker to reach sound at a decibel at a certain spot of the room, for example, let's say that the room is very large and you have to make sure that when you're standing at this spot of the room that it has to be at least 85 dB, 85 decibel at the center of the room, then that PA speaker, which is probably like 20, 30 feet away, has to be able to pump out sound pressure to an 85 decibel when it reaches the center of the room. And if your omnidirectional microphone that you're planning to use is limiting that, because the higher you create that sound pressure, the closer you're building that barrier. And if you cross that barrier, you get the feedback. So the higher the sound pressure of in other words, the louder you increase the volume on that PA speaker, that barrier of sound pressure increases. And if that barrier or that bubble reaches or breaches the barrier of the omnidirectional microphone capture, you're going to enter that loop of feedback. So this is why when you increase the volume on a speaker at a certain point based on whatever microphone you use and the distance between the two, you're going to have an instant feedback. And you bring the volume back down. This is what happens for sound engineers. So people might be wondering, oh man, my microphone is always sitting at -20. Why can't I have it at 0? Well, possibly the type of microphone you have is highly sensitive, and the distance between that bubble of polar pattern and the bubble of the decibel of the PA speaker is crossing between each other, creating that feedback zone. And you have to reduce the bubble, reduce the volume of the PA speaker, or otherwise fix the type of microphone you're using to be able to increase the volume of the PA speaker. So there's so many different options and ways you can structure it to say, you know what, I want a loud environment, I want loud sound, I want the sound to be at a certain decibel for a certain environment. Then you have to really know what type of microphones are needed for that decibel that you want to achieve. But if you want to keep things at just a standard decibel, 85 dB, that's also, you have to know based on where the distancing and the positioning of the PA speakers are from the microphones, that it's not going to be interfering. The frequency bubble is of each of them are not going to be interfering with each other to cause that feedback or loop of audio. Now there's a condition with this general, okay? When I say generally, there's a condition to it. Generally, they say PA speakers have to be positioned at least 10 feet away. Projected audio sources have to be positioned at least 10 feet away from capture sources if it's an omnidirectional mic. So you need at least a 10-foot distance. And I believe that's between 60 to 80 decibel of volume. But even though they're 10 feet away, the moment you go above 85 dB, you're going to get the feedback. So then you might say, oh, well, I positioned them 10 feet away, but I'm still getting feedback. Well, probably because that bubble, like I said, the volume coming out of that PA speaker has breached into the bubble of the capture source, the microphone. So there's two factors, like I said. So you could have them 10 feet away, but if the volume is not to what you want it to and you want the volume to increase, well, you have to increase that distance between the two devices, the projected audio and the capturing audio. So these are two factors that have to be put into place, but they say generally, because it all depends on, you know, how loud you want it in the room, but generally the PA speaker needs to be at least 10 feet away from the capture source to be at least within normal audio, which is about 60 to 80 dB. So these are all facts you have to keep in mind when designing and planning the structure of a sound environment of a room. Therefore, based on the environment and the size and the PA speakers, because you also have different PA speakers, and oh my goodness, we're getting into so much stuff here. But let me continue on. And based on the size and the PA speakers and the volume, it will all contribute to create various limitations. And the goal is to reduce all those limitations and hotspots for then clean audio, which is little to no feedback zones and a controlled decibel. I don't know if I did, but I don't want to forget about it. So I'm going to mention it now. And if I did already mention it, I'll skip it, okay? But it just made me think of something. So PA speakers, you'll see that there's different sizes of PAs and different wattage. You'll have like a 20 watt speaker, you'll have like a 300 watt speaker, you'll have like a 2000 watt PA speaker. And they'll come in like little tiny speakers, and they'll come with big speakers. And people think, oh, bigger speakers, the better. The more watt, the more power, the more volume, the more sound. Essentially, yes, that is true, but not always best in most applications. The larger the drum on the speaker, and when I say drum, I'm talking about that round thing that you see on a PA speaker. So you see here, this is a drum, and this is what I'm talking about when I'm saying a drum. So on the drum of a speaker, the bigger the drum, the more heavy and the more low end of frequency it supports. And the smaller the drum, the more sharp and more tinny, the more high and crisp the sound is going to be. So this is why you'll see on most PA speakers, it has the big drum for the bass, the boom, 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 and it has the small one for the sharp, crisp, high frequencies of vocals and all the other higher end frequencies. So it supports the lows, it supports the highs, and in the speaker inside of it, it has computer parts and components and chips that will take in the frequencies, the spectrum of frequencies, and says, okay, between this frequency to this frequency, we're sending your signal to this speaker. Between this high frequency to that high frequency, we're now sending you to this speaker. So different frequencies in the PA speaker will be sent to different drums. The small drum or the big drum or the middle. Sometimes PA speakers will have 5 or 6 different drums, which is for a more clean, crisp, and full, rich sound. Let me put this down beside me. So with that being said, people often overlook it and look at. Sorry, people often overlook it, and when they're buying speakers, and they say, "Well, I don't know why there's so many drums inside of this PA speaker, and what's the difference between a bigger speaker and a smaller speaker?" There is a huge difference, and they all have different purposes, and it's not like, okay, one size fits all. It's never the case. So because of that fact, that's why they design different speakers for different size rooms and different environments and different purposes. Now, to get just a general speaker, a PA speaker, and to get one that just has a single drum in it, for all of that spectrum of frequency to fit in that single drum, you're going to compress that sound, and it will often become noise. And this is where people will end up hearing that and say, "Oh, this speaker sounds really cheap." The thing that gives a speaker a very cheap sound is because all of the sound is being compressed and shoved through a single output, which is now limiting the frequencies, the lows and the highs, that whole spectrum of frequency, to now come through a single source, which they often get mingled and jammed, and you don't hear the frequencies properly, and it distorts it. And this is why small speakers, which are economy, I call them economy speakers, $300 a speaker, and they just try to save money in getting these smaller PA speakers, which are generally used for stage monitors, and they try to use them for like professional application to reach a whole congregation of people. These kind of speakers, if you increase the volume too much, knowing the fact that they're jamming everything through a small drum, you're going to not only make that noise and that jammed up, mixed up frequencied audio more evident and more noticeable. So that's why when you increase the volume on a really poorly cheap designed PA speaker, which is a single drum to save money, you're going to notice that it's like noise, not enjoyable, and it just makes it more synthetic. So that's one very, very important thing about PA speakers that a lot of people don't even know about. Even professionals don't have that understanding of the type of PA speakers they use. Is very crucial. And you need to know which type of PA speaker is needed for what type of sound you're trying to produce. And it all depends on what kind of sound you're trying to produce. So that's why you'll see that some places will have a bunch of small PA speakers to produce all that clean sound, and then they'll have a huge giant subwoofer in the room to create the big boom, boom, boom sound so that they can cover the high frequency spectrum and the low frequency spectrum. But the problem with that is, even though they are buying a small speaker and a large speaker, a mixer doesn't separate that. There's no mixer that says, I'm going to separate this part of the frequencies to go to this speaker and that part of the frequencies to go to that speaker. It sends all the frequencies to whatever speaker you want to send it to. You can't divide frequencies. As far as I have come across and have learned, and it's where technology is at right now, well, great, maybe in the future that would be wonderful if they can split frequencies and say that, okay, we want this frequency. Now, I'm thinking, now that I'm speaking, I'm thinking that it is kind of possible to say that, okay, and that's why they have low cuts and high cuts. You can cut certain frequencies out of your input source. Like, let's say a microphone, I can do a low cut on a microphone to say that, okay, I want all the lows cut out of my microphone so that it's cutting out the low frequency and only my microphone is coming to this speaker. And then I want only the lows on my drum and my bass guitar and cut out the highs from that. So all my, there's ways on software you can allocate frequencies from input sources and then direct that to output sources. But I wouldn't recommend that, because there is crucial low frequencies in a vocal that you don't want to cut out. There is crucial high frequencies in a low frequency instrument that you don't want to cut out. Because the moment you cut out frequencies, you're taking away that natural audio. And this is what I strongly advise against, and say that no, you should rather get equipment that can produce and push out and handle the spectrum of frequency, rather than trying to cut corners and say, well, let's allocate and restrict the frequencies to come out to what these speakers can handle. So that's why I don't agree with low cutting and high cutting, and I say that no, we should have the proper equipment that can produce the sound so that no audio quality is lost. That's why I strive for HQ, high quality, lossless, high fidelity audio. And that's what it is. And if you're doing a lot of low cutting, high cutting, you can't call that lossless. You're losing the frequencies. So that's basically in a nutshell what I had to share with that point. But one of the things here is, because I'm getting into detail about a lot of this here, but I have a few other points that quite a few actually, but I'll try to rush through this. To achieve this, we must first evaluate the size of the room and the type of PA speakers used and what watt powers they require to produce, because the more wattage, the more sound pressure they're able to pump out. Now, like I was talking about with the larger drums and the smaller drums, I would advise getting a PA speaker, because you don't want to be cutting corners and limiting and restricting frequencies from inputs to certain outputs. Get PA speakers that can handle the entire spectrum of frequencies, which are generally about $2,000 a speaker, like the QSCs. They can handle, because they have the smaller drums, the middle drums, and the bigger drums built in. That's why they're giant, massive PA speakers. It's not, oh, it's a bigger PA speaker, it's more louder, and people think, oh, we don't want it so loud, so let's get a smaller speaker. The size of the speaker is not about the loudness. It's about the quality it produces and the spectrum that it supports of the frequencies. So that's why people have that misunderstanding and think that, oh, we don't need a huge speaker because we don't want it too loud. That's not what big speakers are for. It's for more cleaner sound. So that's what I had to briefly share, and I probably already made a point about it, but I'll skip it if I come across it. Let's see here. So to achieve this, we must first evaluate the size of the room and the type of the speakers used and the watt power it pulls. Larger PA speakers can produce sound to reach further distances. That's another thing too, is they can handle more volume. So that's another thing to consider. If you're in a larger environment, you need bigger speakers to push out more sound pressure decibel. And they also have smaller feedback than smaller PA speakers, because it's the higher frequencies that tend to be more sensitive to feedback. But the larger the speaker, the more expensive. This is another flip side to it. Yet larger speakers produce better sound with options to go louder. They're not necessarily louder, they produce better sound with the extra option to go louder. This is why you get what you pay for. So the Canadian legal listening decibel limit is 85 decibels for 1 hour maximum of listening, consistent. If you're listening for an hour consistently, 85 dB, I don't know how long this meeting has been going. I don't want it to cut off suddenly. But if it does, I'll start another recording. So I'm almost done, halfway here. The Canadian legal listening decibel is 85 dB per hour of constant listening as a maximum on average for safe hearing. And then between 90 to 100 decibel at peak. So if there's a sudden spike in that audio at a high decibel or sound pressure, between 90 to 100. Anything higher than 100 will cause listening issues. Anything higher than 85 on average for a consistent amount of time. They say, okay, if it's going to be on average between 90 to 100, no longer than 10, 15 minutes of listening. So which means for a church setting, 85 decibel, we have like a 2-hour service. They say 85 per hour. So if we're having a 2-hour service, this generally means it has to be less than 85. So 85 is like really maximum. And essentially, technically, it should be actually less than 85 if we're going to be having a 2-hour service. So this is one thing to consider. This means that in a normal conversation, if I was to have a normal dialogue with someone, a normal dialogue without any projected audio, no PA speakers, if I was just going to sit in a room and have a conversation with someone, that is 60 dB. So they say normal decibel can be listened 24 hours without hearing problem. So between 60 to 85 is normal dialogue. 85 is projected audio with PA speakers, and it shouldn't be more than an hour. So this is what the legal requirements are. That we have to be careful, because we don't want to be causing hearing damage for people when we produce sound. Now, what I say here is, this means that as the further you go from the PA speaker, the further you go, the decibel reduces. This is a common sense thing. So therefore, the zone of the seating, so the seating, you have to take that into factor. Where is where the seating area is, or where people will be, wherever the people will be that will be hearing this sound, cannot exceed 85 decibels on average for an hour of listening. So then the volume can be increased until it reaches 85 dB within that access zone. I call it the access zone, which is the seating area. So this means that if it's 100 dB when it's right beside the speaker, that's fine, because no one's going to be there listening right beside the speaker. They're going to be listening where the first seat is. So this is why you got to increase it so that the decibel is within that limit where people will be hearing it from. Straightforward, right? Common sense. So if people are able to come closer, now here's the catch, if people are able to come closer to that PA speaker or walk past it, then that's a dangerous zone for people to have hearing damage. And sometimes they can walk into the room and they walk right past the speaker and it can blow their eardrum. So this means that the speakers have to be positioned in a spot where people won't be walking past them. And if they're going to be walking past them, then it has to be within that legal decibel limit where the nearest person is able to cross that speaker, which means that it's going to essentially be less than 85 dB at the nearest seat, which is not ideal. So these are the complications, and these are two factors. That's why when most professionals set up sound or PA speakers, they will first figure out where can the speaker be positioned that people won't be coming near it, or not. It's not a walking zone or not an access zone, and also where people are not walking towards it. How can we get this speaker to produce 85 dB where people will be gathering? So there's two factors there that have to be looked at and addressed. Because the moment someone's able to cross in between that, then you have to reduce it so that it doesn't create a dangerous zone for people that cross in between the access zone and the projected audio. So that's what I had to say there. So if people are able to come closer to the PA speaker or walk past the PA speaker any closer than the access zone, they will be subject to the risk of hearing damage, which is not good. And that can be permanent. So this means that PA speakers have to be installed at a decibel measured by the nearest distance that someone would pass by that sound produced source.